Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Kathryn Gates in Austin, Texas. Kathryn is a psychotherapist and fitness specialist who works with adults, teens, couples, and families. Kathryn's mission is to support her clients in healing their pasts and embracing their creativity to find their unique life purpose. This is actually her second time as a guest on the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And Kathryn, thank you for joining me. It's great to have you back.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciate this podcast, so I'm glad I can contribute.
Oh, well, I'm so excited. I'm trying to think of when the last time was that you were here. I almost think it was a couple of years ago. But
I think it...
Yeah.
Time passes so quickly.
Right. We've been talking about doing this again, and people really received the first episode so well, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious because I know you work with hundreds and hundreds of clients who are struggling with different problems in different parts of their lives. And, you know, I think a lot of times when we think of things that stress us out, we're thinking of things like family issues or issues with like our children or other sorts of like personal things. How often do you find that people are actually struggling, though, with issues related to their work?
It's actually quite a lot of the time, whether it's relationships at work or job transition or career or how does my point being alive relate to what I'm doing at work. It's really a lot of the time. And it's funny because knowing that I was going to do this interview with you today, I couldn't help but notice that every client I saw yesterday, that was the majority of what we talked about was either job or career or partner's opinion of job or career. It was really, I was like, wow, this is great timing. So it really does come up a lot.
Yeah, it seems really common. Do you think it's like more or less than half the people that you talk to?
Oh, definitely more. Definitely. I'd say 90%.
Oh, wow, so interesting. I mean, when you got into this field, did you expect that? I would typically in my head, I would think it would be more personal.
Well, it definitely ebbs and flows. I mean, it's not always 90%, and sometimes that's the primary thing we're talking about. Sometimes that comes into the mix. You know, like if somebody's stressed, then probably job has to do with that if it's not a major part of that.
And it seems like it must. If they're having trouble at work, does it influence also their personal life, or does it just stay at work?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a skill that people can learn to leave it at work. But a lot of times, if something's on your mind, it's going to stay on your mind even when you're not at the place where you are 8+ hours a day.
And that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
That's definitely a lot of time. Well, you mentioned a few of the issues that people typically have. I mean, are there certain themes that seem to come up the most when it comes to, you know, people are upset there's something happening at work? Is it, I mean, are there definite themes that you see between sort of like work issues?
So a lot of times it's relationships at work, which is fun for me because I like to talk about relationships. Relationships at work are obviously different than personal relationships because there's the power dynamic of if this is a relationship with a boss, and there's different expectations than if it were a friend. So relationships often, whether it's with someone higher up or equal, relationships are often a challenge that people have. A lot of times we're talking about the challenge of the instability of working freelance.
Oh, interesting.
And a lot of people are either small business owners or part of a startup or freelancing in whatever field they're good at. And especially when you start out, that's really challenging to navigate going from a regular paycheck to working as a freelance artist. Whether it's, you know, whatever field it is. There's a lot of startups here in Austin. There's a lot of small business owners. And it's a different ballgame, as you know, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks to now this project is paying, making sure this client paid, and it's a whole different way of life. So that's what comes up sometimes. Also, and this is often whenever I call on you for support, career transition. Folks are realizing this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. This isn't fulfilling. This isn't where I want to be. I need to get either in a different job or in a whole different career path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really tough. And I mean, the clients that I work with who are experiencing that a lot of times are sort of mid-career. That's like one really typical point when that happens. Or sometimes they're right out of school and they realize they studied something maybe they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Which is tough.
That can be tricky because, you put all of this time and all of this money into, that's the whole, when you're in your 20s, the typical college age, like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So it's quite a disappointment when there you are, you worked so hard, and wait a minute, this isn't where I need to be.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I actually talked to a college professor recently who talked about having students whose parents will only agree to pay for a certain college major, let's say accounting. Yeah, and she'll talk to them and they know that like they hate accounting and they're kind of in this tough position of, do I keep studying this thing that I don't like and get a degree, or do I have to like drop out of school?
Oh.
Which is really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, how do you even, begin to deal with that? But I'm curious, like when you're talking to people, do you get the impression that when they're dealing with work stress, that they're reaching out to friends or family for support, or do you feel like they're dealing with it more sort of like themselves, like they keep it to themselves?
Well, that varies, and that's a big part of how able people are to manage their stress, whether it comes to work or family or whatever the stress may be, is how able they are to connect socially and utilize those interpersonal relationships to manage stress. I mean, as mammals, we're social beings, and we're meant to rely on each other for support. And so, yeah, sometimes people are already talking to friends about it, family about it, and this is another place where they're coming to talk about it and get some skills to figure out how to deal with it and manage it better. But sometimes, the other thing you said, sometimes people don't mention it, or maybe they don't want to burden other people with it, which ends up being not only a disservice to them because it makes it harder to handle, but it also keeps them from really being more close and connected to the people in their personal network.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed a lot of times with folks that I talk to, they often feel like they're sort of like the only one having this experience. Like they're the only one who's ever been laid off, or they're the only one who's ever had trouble with a boss. And
oh, wow.
I always just wish like I could get them all in a room together.
I know.
Because we're all having the same struggle, right? It's really similar. And I think that's where, like you kind of mentioned, like leaning on other people can actually be helpful.
Totally.
Yeah,
because we all struggle at work sometimes. We all disagree with people. We all don't want to do what somebody else wants us to do sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, many of us over the course of our career will be fired or laid off or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we can, that we're not a useful employee or that we're never going to contribute again. Or,
oh, for sure.
Because I think that feels like a pretty big black mark when it happens.
Yeah. So this is a great idea, Angela. I'm going to start a group now for people who have been fired or laid off so that we can all lean on each other. Because, yeah, it happens, and it doesn't necessarily always happen because you're a bad worker or because you did something wrong even.
Yeah. Here they actually call them career transition groups. And, but I don't know, like you should totally create one. The people who go to them get so much support. Like they talk to each other, they talk about how hard it is, and they find out that like they're not the only ones struggling, and then they help each other with things like their resume. It's really cool.
Right.
Yeah. I think Austin needs one.
Yeah, I've heard actually, I've had clients tell me about something similar, like a career transition group. I don't know if it was specifically geared toward being laid off or being fired, because I know that's sometimes even bigger hurdle to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it wasn't hard enough to find a new position, you've got to get your self-esteem back from like, oh, well, maybe I'm not cut out for this or whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. From my experience, most of the people who go to career transition groups, at least here, most of them have either been fired or laid off.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the place to go and connect. And it's a really, really positive thing.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious, like a number of people I talk to, feel like they're so unhappy because they're in the wrong job. And sometimes I kind of wonder are they in the wrong role, like the wrong job function, or are they in the wrong environment? Like they're working, in a company that's like not a healthy place to be. And I'm curious from your perspective, like when you talk to clients, like how can we tell the difference between when we're in the wrong role and when we're just in the wrong place, like the wrong environment?
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is, hopefully we all know at least one person who is happy wherever they're put.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe the job is difficult or unfulfilling. Maybe the boss is aggravating, but they find ways to manage and take care of themselves and enjoy things. Now, so part of me wonders when you ask this question, is it a bad job or is it an unhappy person?
Mm.
Right. All of this being said by a person who has had really bad jobs before. So I don't just write off, oh, well, it's your fault if you're not enjoying your job. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's not always the case. There's some personal responsibility in being happy wherever you are. But, yes, I know there are circumstances where this isn't what I need to be doing. Or, like you said, this isn't the place where I need to be. So I guess it would be like a case-by-case situation to determine whether it's more the function that needs to change or the actual company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just talking to someone I think it was last week, and they were initially thinking, I just want to blow everything up and start over kind of a thing. And, I started kind of wading through the details, and I said, your current job, would you like your current job if it was a different product or a different company or in a different city? And the person said, yeah, actually, I think I would. And I'm like, well, then why are we doing a soul searching process to find a new type of job when maybe we need to be doing a process to search and find a new environment, like a healthier environment that's in a different place? I just think it's a different issue.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, great job exploring that. Because when people get fed up, yeah, you do get to the bottom of your rope and you're just like, screw it all. I just want to get out of here and walk dogs for a living or, do something totally different. And you're right. It's not always, this is the wrong field for me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is just, this minor change will make a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the walk dogs for a living thing. I mean, that kind of takes you back to the whole being an independent contractor or doing, sort of different small projects instead of a full-time paycheck. And that in itself, like you mentioned, brings a world of stress. And it can be worth it because you can really do things that you enjoy, but it's also something you kind of have to be ready for, I think.
Right.
Emotionally, to be able to work through that.
Yeah, I think people envision freelance work as not having to answer to anybody and just being able to do whatever you want, which in some cases it is, but it also tacks on a lot of responsibility with it, and in some cases a lot of extra hours in exchange for that.
Mm-hmm. And it can be worth it, but in a way, rather than not answering to anybody, it's in a certain way you're answering to everybody because you have so many clients.
That's true.
And it can be stressful if you only have a few clients because you depend on them so much, and they can walk away from you more easily than than they could walk away from you if it was a corporate full-time situation.
Exactly.
So it can definitely be tough. Well, so speaking of sort of different types of careers, you have actually had a number of different types of careers, including personal training and some other different things. And I'm curious from your own perspective, like, how were you able to find your own path? And like, how were you able to decide that you wanted to get into psychotherapy? And I mean, how did we get here? I mean, it's
Did we get
kind of a big question.
what my parents ask me every day? So I don't really think of it as different career paths because it's all led here. I mean, the straightforward answer that I give when people ask, I mean, there's many reasons why I pursued working as a psychotherapist. But the first straightforward answer I give is working as a personal trainer. Any personal trainer will tell you that they're a counselor. When people are sweating and they're vulnerable, then they start talking about their mom and they start talking about whatever challenges there are at home. And so there's that piece of it. But then there's also the piece where I would work with clients and we would say, okay, these are your goals. This is how we're going to get there. You're going to do this much cardio between when we see each other again. You're going to have this sort of a meal plan in the time between we meet again. And we'd come back the next week and they hadn't done it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's obviously things keeping people from doing the things that they say they want to do, even when they know exactly how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really interested in how can I actually help people make the changes that they say they want to make. And it's deeper than this is how many sit-ups you need to do. This is how many, bicep curls.
Mm-hmm.
So went back and studied clinical psychology, and I love being able to help people on a deeper level. And then, of course, it's exciting, too, when I get to work with athletes, when I get to work with folks with body dysmorphia and eating disorders, so I can kind of combine the physical stuff that I have a background in with the mental stuff. So it's all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so, and you went back, like you said, you went back to school and studied. Like, how long did the transition take you to sort of change careers? Was it like a year, 2 years, 5 years? Like, what did it look like?
So, again, I really don't even see it as a now I'm this and now I'm that.
Sure.
While I was in grad school, I was still working as a personal trainer. I did some physical therapy aid work. I've still, since I've been licensed, done fitness work as well, like exclusively fitness work, not just with psychotherapy clients. So I don't know if I really see it as like a black and white, one side of the line and then the other side of the line. I'm thinking of something that Michelle Obama said at some point, which is along the lines of, we never stop, hopefully, we never stop becoming. Like I think she was saying she doesn't like this question of kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because that implies that you become something and then you stop.
Mm-hmm.
And although there are people who have one career and that's what they do and flourish throughout their adult life, I kind of see it as here's where I am right now. And this is the way I'm contributing to the world and feeling fulfillment for who I am, and that's going to continue to change, I hope.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think my point in general is just that it probably was not like an overnight thing to get the idea to also do psychotherapy and then to get a degree and to start practicing. Like it.
No, definitely not.
It seems like it took some time and energy to make that all happen and kind of bring it all together.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm curious, for somebody else who is trying to make a big transition and who is trying to continue to sort of evolve, I mean, do you have, like, what kinds of advice do you typically give them in terms of where to begin if they're not really quite sure, the direction that they want to go?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I do work with people who feel stuck, and maybe they even know exactly what they want to do, but it feels kind of what I was referring to earlier. It feels like it needs to be, I was this and now I'm that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it's worked for me is that it's not just a now I'm black, I was white. It's a smoother transition than that. Maybe it's, can I reduce my work hours at my full-time job and slowly start taking 5 hours a week in this direction?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'm starting my freelance artist work, but I'm also still going to keep coaching this sports team so that I have that consistent income while I'm building up my artistry. So it really, the way that I've seen it work is not that it's going to be one thing then the other. It's going to be more of a transition, and it's going to be more of a willingness to just be where you are right now and allow things to happen, and, not expect that today I'm a doctor. I was an engineer. It just, I don't see how that's feasible to just make it that drastic of a change.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing, too, that you're kind of addressing in the strategy that you're mentioning there is that you're creating a little more level of financial stability between the two.
Yep. Yeah, because that's huge. I mean, that's what, in my experience, keeps people from making a transition as quickly as they would like to. Like, I'd love to do this, but how am I going to pay my bills?
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's super stressful, and it's added to it with things like, how am I going to get my own health care? if it comes to being like self-employed, for example, there's just a lot of details that you have to figure out on top of just how can I be this new role, like logistically how to actually make it happen.
Right.
Well, so I'm curious, if we find ourselves like super stressed at work, or like when you work with clients who are just really stressed at work, what kind of things could they do to help manage the situation better?
So stress at work could be any number of things, especially when people are either in an intensely stressful job or just the amount of time that they spend working. We've got to make sure we're taking breaks. And that this means on make sure you're using your vacation days. Get away from there. Go see a new place. Go breathe different air. But also just within the day, like take your lunches. Take your breaks to go get outside and breathe fresh air and feel the sunshine. If you don't feel like you can do that, step into the restroom. Close the stall door. Take some deep breaths. Nobody's going to bug you in there.
It's true.
We've got to be able to take breaks so that we can stay engaged and stay involved and stay at the top of our game while we are working.
Absolutely. What about, like, you mentioned physical fitness and that it has a huge impact, to our overall stress level and health. Like, are there certain kinds of physical, like, activities that we can do in terms of, like, working out? Like, if we only have a little bit of time, where would we want to focus in terms of stress reduction from a physical activity?
Yeah, this is a great question. I remember being asked this when I was working exclusively as a personal trainer. Like, I work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. I work through lunch. We usually have junk food at lunch. When I'm off, I want to just spend time with my partner. I don't want to be at the gym. This is definitely a challenge, and I would say in our culture. And this, again, is my encouragement to find ways to take a break. And this isn't just we all need to have this many hours of this in our day, this many hours of this in our day, because some people really love to work, and that's awesome. If you've got work that you love to do, I'm not trying to take any of that away from you so you can go to the gym. But we've got to have, like you're saying, times throughout the day that you get up from the desk, you go walk around, you stretch your neck, you stretch your back. Whether it's a specific physical prescription as far as what you need to do to work out, or just we've got to get moving more. If your job is sedentary, then it's really important, even for your brain function, for you to make sure your physical self still has things flowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so what about from a nutrition perspective? You mentioned junk food. What sorts of foods, if we're having a lot of stress, where should we focus our energy in terms of food?
So everybody has different nutritional needs. I think we're finding that out more on a scientific level, that some people do really great eating lots of carbs, and some people do really great eating lots of fats, and some people do really great eating 8 times a day, small meals. Some people do really great with an intermittent fast, eating most of their nutrients in a shorter window. So I really don't want to be another person to prescribe, this is the way everyone should eat.
Sure.
I will say eating real food is good for everybody. The more actual food that we know what it is going to be beneficial and nutritious to your body and contribute to you feeling better than processed stuff.
Sure. So when you say real food, you mean food that is like identifiable, that not something in a package like chips or something.
Yeah, if it's got a, and foods are packaged even when they're real foods, but if there's ingredients that you don't know what it is, maybe find food that you know what it is.
Yeah. And probably planning ahead a little bit so that you don't end up, getting food out of the vending machine because you don't have other options, I could see.
Yeah, eating natural food isn't easy. I mean, we don't make health accessible in our country.
Totally.
But it is an option, and it requires planning. You're right.
Yeah. What about sleep? Do you think, how much of a role does sleep play into how stressed that we feel?
Sleep is huge. Sleep is huge. If people aren't sleeping, in treatment facilities where I've worked, that's like the first thing the psychiatrist asks. A lot of people expect psychiatrists to be hung up on medications, but sleep is so big that, if you're not getting enough sleep, then you're going to feel super hungry and you're going to eat junk that isn't nutritious just because your body's like, I need energy, where can I get it?
Yeah.
Sleep hygiene is really big, yeah.
When you say sleep hygiene, what do you mean?
So sleep hygiene, like the basics of make sure the only thing you're doing in bed is sleeping or having sex. Don't bring work into bed. Don't watch TV in bed. Making sure that your bedroom is dark. You don't have a bunch of electronic lights in there. Having routine before bed, like every night I brush my teeth, and then I put on my PJs, and then I get some water, and then I read a book. Having whatever routine you have is fine, but doing something regularly so that your brain goes, oh, I'm getting ready to sleep.
I like that. I think it's really, really important. Well, so let's switch to like a slightly different topic, which is couples. And I'm sure that you work with couples. I've actually occasionally worked with couples as well, but I work with them kind of separately on their job searches. And I've noticed sometimes that when I do work with couples, they sometimes have different life goals from each other. And so, like, in other words, one partner really wants to find balance and maybe wants to keep their life kind of minimalized. And the other person is really focused on having like a high-powered career, making a lot of money, that kind of thing. If we sort of find ourselves at some point, with a partner where we kind of have this unbalanced situation, do you have a few tips for us? Like, what can we do?
Yeah, that happens a lot, actually. Whether it's the way that you described, where I'm more career focused and I'm more everything else focused, or maybe one partner is a salary, full-time job, consistency, and the other partner is, I want to do freelance, I want to work for myself, I'm okay with the fluctuation of income, and that can be really tough for the person who is really counting on that salary. So the main thing with couples when it comes to discrepancy in job or career goals, and really anything, is, are we able to talk about it? And are we able to really hear what the other person is saying and why that's important to them? And are we able to identify what our contract is? Because a lot of times when difference in career is a problem, it's because there's a difference in ideas about money. And so, just for example, maybe the person with the salary thinks, oh, well, they're going to freelance just so that I have to pay all the bills. Or maybe the freelance person thinks, oh, they don't care if I'm fulfilled in my work life, and they expect me to get a job the way that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the ability to talk about it and determine what are we agreeing to as far as this is what I'm going to be financially responsible for, this is what I'm going to be responsible for around the house, because maybe I'll have time at this point and you'll be engaged. So it really comes down to, and I feel trite saying this because every couple that calls me says, we want help with communication, but it really does come down to communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say contract, like, do you mean like actually writing out the stuff on paper, or like a verbal contract? Like, what do you mean?
It could be on paper, but it's really just, what do I agree with my partner we're doing with our work? So, let's say a couple has a newborn. It makes sense if the contract is for one partner to care for the child and one partner to bring in the majority of the money. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a really simplistic example, but it's something that the couple has to agree on.
Mm-hmm.
So what is our agreement on how career is going to contribute to this relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it must also be tricky when, say, both partners have like the full-time corporate job with the salary, and then sort of like midstream, years into the relationship, one of them decides, to start a business or something where they're now, they have that income that goes up and down and fluctuates, and it kind of changes that contract a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. And that's when we've got to be able to talk about this, which if that wrench is kind of thrown in there that we've always just known it's going to work like this may be a new thing to have to talk about it because we never really did before. So, I'm always promoting people getting into psychotherapy. If this is something that we find we just can't talk about successfully and come to resolutions with, it's a great opportunity to find a marriage and family therapist who can teach you skills to communicate more effectively and resolve conflict.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, so this actually kind of makes me think of something else I recently saw, which is that Indeed did a survey, Indeed.com, the job website, they did a survey about looking for new work. And they found, a lot of people keep their job search a secret, because of course, if you have like a full-time job, you could be let go for searching for another job, that kind of thing. But they interestingly also found that most people also keep it a secret from their spouse. That was kind of interesting. So, I was the question was posed to me as to like, why is that?
Sure.
And from my perspective, I think my guess was that it was so that the couple can like avoid conflict, or they can avoid feeling embarrassed if they don't get the job or if they don't even get an interview. But
sure.
I don't know, what would be your prediction about why are we keeping our search secret from our significant other?
Yeah, that's really relevant. And that's a great question to ask folks. If it's, I don't think my partner will respond in a way that I can handle, maybe that's something that we want to look at, right? I mean, is this the kind of relationship that I want to be in where I have to keep major life changes a secret from the person who ideally is my biggest advocate, my partner, the person who I rely on the most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good question, It's an interesting thing to find in a study. I'm curious, is there anything else like that we've missed in terms of, work, in terms of keeping our stress levels low, that we should really keep in mind sort of as we're, heading into the new year and we're really kind of refocusing our goals?
Yeah, keep happiness in mind. I mean, don't expect your job to give it to you. Decide to choose it for yourself.
That's really good. I actually saw something recently about the fact that I think different people maybe have different expectations about whether or not their work itself should make them happy. Or whether they have to sort of find it on their own, separate from work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I have a lot of times couples will say, well, he's not making me happy. Well, she's not making me happy. Well, that's nobody's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your job's responsibility to make you happy. And so if there's changes that you need to make in yourself, or even if it means changing to a different position, yeah, I think a lot of times we can be a little entitled and just expect to be given things that maybe we could work a little harder for and take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Well, Kathryn, this has been excellent. Where can we go to learn more about you and your work?
So my website is gatestherapy.com, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter at gatestherapy.
Perfect. I will put links to this in the show notes so that it's easy to get in touch with you and to find you, all over the internet. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you, Angela.
And thanks for everyone for listening. Thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to angela@copelandcoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach. And on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out. Subscribe on iTunes and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.